Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Words podcast. My guest today is Debbie Simmons. Debbie is a faith-filled, faith-driven leader, entrepreneur, and speaker who inspires others to live intentionally and to leave a lasting impact. After the heartbreaking loss of four sons, Debbie and her husband Scott adopted nine children, embracing a life of purpose and unwavering faith. She has captured her family's story in a book, The Heart of Legacy, Living a Focused, Faithful, and Fearless Life. And she joins us here to chat about that today. Welcome, Debbie.
Hi, glad to be here with you guys.
So, you are faith driven, faith filled, and your life has been marked by profound loss and resilience. Encapsulate that
Mhm.
for us.
Yes, so I would say if you wanted to get just the highlights, you need to get the book for the story, whole story. But just the highlights are, I always tell this is that I had this deep desire as a kid to be a young grandma because my family comes from very large families. They were the younger kids in those families, and my grandparents did not kind of exist for me by the time I came along. And so I had this kind of in my mind, this is my plan, right? And we had a family that was a son on my dad's football team, and they kind of adopted us, and they were our grandparents. And Nanny and Paul, what ended up doing, Nanny was this great faith-filled person, and she just taught me so much. But I watched her for about 25 years suffer from multiple sclerosis. And I just remember how much she still had joy and how much she still loved me and how much she was focused on me, even though I can imagine now, like the pain and everything that she was in, was she was just so focused. And I learned so much from her. So I wanted to be this young grandma. And I was like, okay, so I got into college, found the guy I wanted to marry. We were going to get married, and I was like, can we get married now while we're in college so we can get started on kids, because I have this plan. And he was like, no, we are not getting married right now, we got to finish college. And I'm like, blah 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 blah, and so off we go. We finish college, we get married, and I'm like, okay, I'm a driven girl, let's get busy, we're going to have the kids, I want four, all this good stuff. And lo and behold, infertility was a challenge for us, and years of trying. And we ultimately got onto a study with the Baylor College of Medicine, and we were on the actual fertility medicine. And I had three tries to get pregnant. And the first try, came and went, and my monthly cycle came, and I threw myself on a bed and wished that I was dead. And because I felt like a failure as a mom, as a woman, as a spouse, I'm like, because I'm so driven, and here I am, I can't accomplish this, right? And so my husband was like, we have two more tries. And I picked myself up, and we began the other tries, and we got pregnant on the third try, which was great. And we had two different doctors tell us on the same day, different types of ultrasounds, that we were pregnant with twins. And we were so excited. And I thought, okay, great. I'll just do them two at a time. This will be great. We'll get them over faster. Told everyone around the 13th week, ended up as on my way up into the Exxon building, bleeding in the elevator and thinking that I was going to lose the boys. And we went to the high risk doctor. And the doctor basically said, we joking, this is me joking before we go in to see the doctor. I was like, we're going to go in for this ultrasound, and they're going to tell us we're not having two, we're having three. And my husband was like, ha, funny. So we go in, and lo and behold, we find out that we're pregnant with four.
Wow.
And the crazy thing is, in our minds, we had figured out how to handle two, like how we were going to do things and all this stuff. And like four, just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. And it's one of the most interesting times is when I kind of fell apart. By the time I got home, I, needed to call my mom and them and update them. And I had just lost it, and I hardly ever lose it. But in my head, I'm like going, uh, uh, I'm the breadwinner. Uh, my husband's in graduate school. I'm fixing to be put on bed rest. how are we going to do this? How are we going to have money? What's Exxon going to say? How they're going to work with me? And then I was like, okay, there's going to be 4 kids. And like, how do you feed all these kids at one time? And how do you deal with it? And you know what? My car won't even hold 4 car seats. I can't even get them home from the hospital. And then I just was like, in elementary school and how we pay for everything. And then I'm like, high school. And
You're
then I'm
thinking
like,
about all of this on the first day.
girlfriend. I'm like, college. How am I going to pay for college? Then I was like, what if they're all girls and they have weddings? I won't be able to afford all this stuff. So by that time I got home and I'm talking to my mom and all these things are running through my head. My mom was like, okay, why don't you just breathe? And why don't we just take it one step at a time? And everything, I was just like, that's a great
Right.
idea,
Hmm.
and so it refocused me on the present because man was I allowing everything, and every day in that pregnancy, in a high risk pregnancy, is a miracle to make it to the next day, and your
Right.
goal is to figure out how to make it to 30 at least at that point. Okay. And so off we went on this journey, and we were doing pretty good. Got to about 25 weeks, and I wanted to go to the hospital because I could hardly walk and just tour the hospital and kind of figure everything out. On our way there, on the Gulf Freeway here in Houston, there was bad traffic and we got rear-ended, and I didn't feel so good. But we did the tour, and I ended up in an overnight stay because I was having contractions, and they sent me home. And then it's like every day is a miracle, right? So we continued on. And at 26 weeks, I woke up one morning and found that there was water everywhere. I didn't know what that was. I thought my bladder wasn't working. I'm going to have to wear a diaper. This is going to be terrible, and then it dawned on me, oh, maybe one of the sacks broke, and I'm like, oh, we got to go to the doctor. And I knew that the doctor was going to put us into the hospital at that point and would require me to stay. And so off we went to the doctor. The doctor sent us to the hospital. My husband stayed the first night with me because I was just like, this is just too much, right? I mean, it's overwhelming. And my parents started driving over to be with us to kind of get me adjusted, thinking we would be there several weeks. And the next morning, one of the boys woke me up by sticking his hand out my stitched cervix and going, hello, I'm coming. And that was the first time I ever really felt contractions, which is, I was just like, oh, something's different. And we tried to see if there was a way, like you asked the doctor, is there a way to say, can we stop
To
this?
stop it. Right.
Yeah. And all this stuff. And she was like, no. And my husband's like, are you sure? And she's like, look, the first baby's coming, and if she can handle it, then the other boys can stay as long as she doesn't get super ill. And so we took the stitches out of my cervix. We went and we waited, and the first baby came. And because technology at that point, because this was about 30 years ago, technology did not exist to handle those medical situations of a 26-week-old baby. They simply put the child in my arms, and the little Zach took his hand, wrapped it around my finger, and squeezed, and was like, Mom, I'm here. And I'm like, I love you. That's all, And I just held him as he passed away. And then I got very, very sick. And so they had to induce the rest of the children, and same kind of process we went through with all of them. And what I remember is that in that night in the hospital, you go thinking you're celebrating a birth, right? Which we were, but at the same time, now we're trying to figure out how to plan funerals,
Right.
and that's wasn't on my radar when I was growing up or when I wanted to be a young grandma, all these things, right? And so I remember in there that I had to choose at that moment, and I did it in the hospital bed that night, to put a stake in the ground and say,
Hmm.
God, I don't know how, but I do know I need to trust you. That I don't know where else to turn. I don't know what else to do with my stuff, but I've got to trust you. And the question for me that rose up was this question of, I think we all get into situations, was why me, why this, why now, why God? And what I learned in that process was no answer to why would ever satisfy me in the present. Okay. It never will. Okay. God could have told me whatever, a friend could have told me whatever. It would never satisfy. It will never bring my boys back. It will never make it better. And it'll never be okay. But what I've learned as I've gotten older is when we get to heaven, the why won't matter because no joy, no pain, no suffering. There's only joy. My boys will be there. Jesus will be there, and it won't matter anymore. So, what God asked me to do in that situation with that why question was to lay that why question at his feet and to give it to him and trust him with that and to change my question. And so the question became, how do I survive? How do I survive this? I don't know how. My heart hurts. I want these children. You know my heart. How do I figure my way through this? And sometimes I make it, back then I made it about, 30 seconds before I had to make that decision again. And then sometimes 2 minutes and then 5 minutes. And now I can, over this particular issue, I don't even ask that question anymore, right? I'm committed to that process. And as I began to walk to figure my way to do the next best thing, God began to heal my heart and show me the way through the pain that I was in. And somewhere in that process, the question changed. And the question became, how do I thrive?
Mm.
Because I don't want to be 30 years down the road and be stuck, kind of emotionally stuck and stuff like that. I'm like, God, how do I thrive? What do I do? I want you to make something beautiful out of this story. Because I don't know what else to do with it. I need, you can do that. You've promised you will do that. And in that sweet space, God can do a lot with us because we are giving him the freedom to use us in ways that we maybe never dreamed. And so it was that took us on a journey. And I know we're going to get into more of it. So I'll save some of the details, but we did get led into the process of adopting and adopted 3 times and ended up with 9 children out of that. And then God also planted the seed to start the ministry of Anchor Point, which impacts thousands of families each and every year. And so that is kind of the journey that he had me on. But Anchor Point wouldn't exist without the journey of the boys. Yeah. So
I like that visual where you said, I'm going to put a stake in the ground
mhm,
and we're going to move forward. Because I've also gotten to the point where I no longer ask why.
mhm.
And it's funny you mentioned that because I was listening to someone on the radio today, a minister on the radio, and he says, learn to lean into whatever God allows.
Mhm.
Just lean into it. Doesn't mean you understand it all, and you can lean without understanding. So that was a really, really good visual. I want to back up for just 1 minute and talk about Scott, because we always hear that opposites attract. And I'm sitting here giggling about how, within a few seconds, you've already, when the dating, let's go ahead and get married because I want to have kids. And then you're doing this, that, and the other. And it seems like Scott is the one who's like doing this all the time. Is that the way he is? Is that your dynamic?
Oh, okay. So here's a funny analogy that I use of us is that we are very different, and my husband's very smart, very cool guy. He trains astronauts and cosmonauts. He's a cool dude. But the picture of us is always standing on the edge of a cliff, and I'm the one going, "Let's go. This is going to be fun. It's going to be great. God will take care of us. It'll be a great ride and everything." And my husband is clinging to the side of the cliff going, "Dude, I'm not going. I'm not going right now." And I'm like, "It's going to be such a great ride. It's going to, so let's just jump off in faith." And I said, "It's only a problem at the bottom if God doesn't show up, but he always shows
Okay.
up." And so
Okay.
God will tell you that I am the one that kind of throws us out there.
Out there, right.
But he is my steady and stable and safe place that loves me unconditionally that allows, fuels me up and allows me to go out and do the things that I do from that standpoint. And he's always super supportive of that. So I'm very blessed. But, we all need those safe places and those steady people, right? And he is definitely one of those. He's the main one in my life.
Excellent, excellent. One of the many things that I love about God is his ability to be very personable, very, very kind with us, very specific with us when we're grieving. During the process, after the loss of your sons, are you able to share a time or two of his comfort that seemed extremely personal?
Oh, yes, sure. Because I would tell you that there's most of us don't experience God the same way in the highs. It is in the lows that it is just I mean, I would say the boys situation was probably the one that I have been most touched by God through all of it. You would, if you knew all of the details that had to happen, um, amazing things happened throughout of it. Now, one of the most interesting ones is that my mother is very much for abortion, and she had to sit there and hold a 26-week-old baby that she would have been okay with aborting. And, the reality of dealing with the gravity of, our choices, but to sit there and it's her grandbaby, that was, a pretty profound experience for her. But for me, there were pieces all along the way. How did the pastor know to come in my room an hour after I got there? And pray for me? Or how did, my parents get there in time so that they could be there because they came from Mississippi and to be there in time to be there for everything with the boys when we didn't know where we were. I mean, you go to the hospital planning this birth and now you're planning a funeral. And so where were we going to bury the boys? I mean, what do you do in those things? This wasn't on my radar list. And um, my nanny actually had extra plots that she gave to us in that there was three plots. And so where my boys are buried, my husband and I will be buried right beside them. And then, so that was gifted to us and graced, us when we didn't have a plan. And then when we called, my father called the funeral home in Mississippi that was going to handle everything because that's where we wanted to bury the boys. The person who answered the phone was my worship pastor that had like mentored and raised me as a kid a lot. He was the one that answered and talked to my dad. And then a funeral home here in Texas, made all the arrangements and paid for the kids to go to Mississippi. And and then the other interesting thing that God had us do, which was really profound, was that when I came home from the hospital, Scott and I sat down and we wrote a birth and a death announcement that we sent to all of our family and friends. And
Wow.
that was totally God driven because what it allowed was for friends and family to now know how to deal with us, but it celebrated the worth of these children and everything. And then the other really amazing thing that happened was we did a memorial service here in Texas. And when I went in to the pastor, I told him, I said, I got up that morning and I said, I'm supposed to talk at this. And I'm like, uh, I just feel very strongly. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but I feel strongly that I'm supposed to talk. And so I'm talking to the pastor, and he said, okay, well, I'm going to do my thing. And when I'm done, I'm going to look at you. And if you go like this, I'm going to say, Debbie has a couple of words to say. And I had no idea what I'm doing. So, anyway, so we go through the service thing, and he looks at me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm supposed to do it. And so this was truly just the Holy Spirit speaking through me. And I literally got up there and I told our friends and I told our family, I said, you know, this is a very difficult experience for us, and obviously not a journey that we want it to be on. And we definitely need you to pray for us. But what I don't need you to do is feel sorry for us. I said, we are
Mm.
extremely blessed. I said, you need to understand that I had perfect children. They never talked back. They did nothing but love, and they're in heaven. That is a great thing. Now, it upsets me as a mom that they know everything and, kind of left me here. But, you know, and then at that moment in my life, I said, you know what? At this point, I was a perfect mom. I'm a perfect mom. I've done nothing but love unconditionally. And, I never yelled at them. I never did anything. And so while it's a difficult experience, I had more people crying in my arms because they were bawling. And I'm like, it's going to be okay. and,
You're
but that
comforting them.
Yes, but that is all God in that. And then he continued to use that as the days go by. But I would tell you, it is just amazing to just watch him show up over and over and over again, which is
Wow.
super.
While you were giving that eulogy, were there laughs? Because it sounds like with your
Yeah.
personality, people, okay, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Well, they were all in shock that I even talked. But even my brother-in-law, who's kind of a little, he's a little Mr. Big Guy. He was like, "You made me cry." I said, "I know. It was just God. It was just God." So,
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, after the service, at some point, the subject of adoption comes up. What time frame are we looking at? And then it wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, there were three adoptions. So let's talk about that.
so as after we lost the boys, we waited about 4 or 5 months, and we tried to start the infertility stuff again, and I just couldn't handle it. My
Yeah.
body was so stressed out. I was just exhausted from years of doing things, and I just told Scott, I just can't do this. And in that time, God challenged me to leave Exxon to go to seminary and get a seminary degree. So I went and did that. And then once I had the seminary degree, we asked God, we told God, we said, hey, wherever you want us to go in the country, whatever job you want me to have and whatever job you want Scott to have, you answer those questions, we'll do that. And he said, ultimately, South Carolina. And we knew that he was going to put me on a church staff as a children's pastor and an executive pastor, kind of dual role. And we didn't have an answer for Scott, but ultimately he was able to take his NASA work out to South Carolina and work for our home. And when we got out there and we kind of got through that, that was about 2.5 years. We got out there. I was like, okay, dude, we need to talk because I'm not getting younger and I still have this young grandma thing going on, that I want to be a young grandma. And I said, should we try again? Or should we think about other things? What should we do? And we made a conscious decision that we could spend literally thousands and thousands of dollars pursuing fertility and end up with nothing, or we could look at taking those thousands and thousands of dollars and investing them in children that needed a home. And so we just had a conversation about what does that look like, and things like, you know, one of the things that, I was asking my husband was like, do you think that we can love kids that aren't the same blood as us? And everything, because that's a big question that comes up for families. And then I'm sitting there thinking about it. I'm going, dude, I love you and you ain't got my blood. So
Right.
there must be something in there that God can work with. And so then, how many would we have? Could we handle kids that were in the foster care system, that had been abandoned, had trauma backgrounds? Were we open to that? And we just started exploring all that. And we really felt that God was leading us to be open to considering children that were in the CPS system that were legally free. And that is what led us into the adoption process. And we didn't really have a clue what we were doing the first time. But when we went through it, we were very open. We knew we wanted a sibling group because remember, I want four. So, I kind of got my plan. And ultimately, our first sibling group was a sibling group of five. And this is another God story in this piece is that my boys were born on April 1st of 1995. My first five children came into my home on April 1st of 2002. That is 7 years to the day.
Wow.
Um, and God not only redeemed that, He gave us four, He gave us five. He gave us more than what we had lost, right? And so we started on that journey. We thought that was enough. That was done. We moved in a basketball team. They were 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And, we had been married for 11, 12 years. We were pretty set in our ways. And, and I remember the very first day they're playing in the backyard, and the youngest one comes in and he stands right in front of me and he looks up in my face and he's like, "Hey, mom, what is for dinner?" And I looked down at this child and I was like, "Dude, do you ask this every day? Because I am seriously not prepared." And so what did that mean? Structure, nurture, laundry systems, plans, because five is, you leave seven pairs of shoes everywhere. It's crazy, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we went through this whole process of that and really felt like that was really going to be our family and everything. About 7 or 8 years later, I'm at a conference and I'm listening to Francis Chan, and I have this love-hate relationship with Francis. I love everything he says. And then my whole body hates him because I'm like, oh, that's sacrifice. That's, you're going to
There's
call.
always a call to action with him. Yes.
Yes, going to take me to the next level. And Francis was talking about this couple, and the guy was a paraplegic. He was in a wheelchair. They're in a third world country. They're super broke, and they are taking the orphans that are left in the road off of their into their homes, and they're raising them. And they expand their little hut, and they keep bringing in kids. Now I'm sitting there, and I'm going, okay, I know what size my house is and I know what the requirements are. I could get probably 14 kids in that house if I rearranged everything and they were the right sex, and all this stuff. And so I'm thinking these things while he's talking. And as he goes along, he talks about like how many kids do we think this family had? And I'm thinking, okay, third world country, 40, 50, maybe, right? Some number like that. It was like 90. Okay. And I was like, oh, 90. And then the other thing was, he said, all of us want to be this couple when they stand in front of Jesus at heaven. And Jesus says, good, good and faithful servant. None of us want to be them now. Right. And I was
Mm.
convicted. I was so convicted that we were supposed to adopt again. That as soon as Francis finished praying and everybody starts leaving the auditorium, I literally take the phone and I call my husband and I'm like, "Dude, I got news for you. We're supposed to adopt again." My husband is like, "Stay gone as long as you would like. I am not interested. We have plenty of kids." Da, 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 da. And I'm like, "Dude, I'm telling you, we're supposed to be doing this." And he uh he at least agreed to pray about it. And so when I got back, we prayed about it. He took about 6 weeks before he said yes this time. And we asked our kids, and interestingly enough, they were all very committed to adopting. And I said, "Well, God says we should count the cost. So what is it going to cost you to adopt?" And they were like, "Well, we'll have to share our rooms. We'll have to do these things." One of my daughters played select softball, and she said, "I might have to give that up because it would cost too much money." And I said, "That could be true." And I said, "Let mom give you some. What if mom can't pay your car insurance? What if mom can't pay for your car? What if mom can't pay for your college? What if, and so I gave them all these scenarios and I said, "But what I do know is God will help us figure our way through those things. But it might not be like you see some other kids just get those things, right?" And so, as much as they could fully commit based on what they knew, they said yes, they definitely wanted to do it. And within 6 months, we had another sibling group of two. So now you got blended
Okay.
family, blended family, blended family. You got all this stuff going on, and it was really hard. It was way harder than we had expected. And my youngest son of the five was 14, and the oldest and the next set was 13. So my 14-year-old is like, oh, I'm going to be a big brother to the 13-year-old and it's going to be great. And my 14-year-old was still playing with Legos and loving life and everything because he's a baby on that side. This 13-year-old moves in the house and he's like, Mom, where's your keys and your wallet? He's wanted to hang out with my 18-year-old son, and I'm like, dude, so this one thought he was going to get to be a big brother, but he was actually less mature than the other one. And so it just created these dynamics. And then you're not my brother. He's my brother. Don't you touch him, those types of things. And
Right, right, right.
I'm like, dudes, I'm like, look, we're going to love each other. We might not like each other all the time. And yes, this is your brother too. And this, and so we went through all of that and everything. And then about three, my oldest daughter ended up having a baby and was in a very messy situation. And I was pretty confident that that baby might get taken away and be in CPS custody. And I really felt convicted that I needed to put my application in to be prepared to adopt again if something were to happen. So it would be easy for us to be able to help with that child. And I told my husband was like, no way are we doing this. And I said, or it could be we're supposed to adopt, and he's like, no way. And he held
Poor
out for,
Scott.
yeah, he held out for 6 months. 6 months he held out. And I would just periodically ask the question. And I'm like, you got to keep praying. It's not going away. These feelings aren't going away. And after 6 months, he said yes. The kids were saying yes. And we put our stuff in. And when I called the agency that time, the lady is like, well, why do you want to adopt? I said, I don't want to adopt. I just want to be obedient. And I just am supposed to turn this application in. And then she's like, oh, you're perfect. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm just being obedient.
I'm
And
doing
so
what I'm supposed to do.
so we turned it in, and lo and behold, my grandchild did not end up in CPS custody. Praise the Lord! And in 6 months, we ended up with another sibling group, and these children are African American. My other children are Caucasian, so that added a level of interesting to all that we do and everything. And then you'll be glad to know, my house started to empty of children and I looked at my husband one day and I said, you know what? I'm wondering if we're supposed to be willing to adopt again. We got empty rooms in our house, one room or two rooms, and, we're not dead yet and we're not broke. And there's kids that we still have a need. And my husband got really smart this time. He said, I think you need to pray about this. He didn't say no because that's never worked. He said, I think you need to pray about this and you need to pray about whether or not God wants us to adopt more children, bring them into our home, which is a good thing, or whether he wants us to spend more time investing in others who can bring children into their home. And so I went on this journey of praying about it for several weeks. And during those several weeks, I had children that had major, massive breakdowns when I'm supposed to be, as CEO of Anchor Point, off doing something else. And I had to take full time with my kiddo, which I gladly do. But I was like, okay, God, I'm not supposed to bring anybody else in my house right now. I need to invest in other people. And not that he'll never call us to do that, but that's how my
Right.
husband got out. That's how my husband got out of that fourth adoption. So
You had mentioned the word invest three times in this conversation. Initially, when the first thought about adoption came up,
a dollar. Uh-huh. Hmm.
and then again, and then and right there. It's a great word that
Hmm.
you're investing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah.
Because
That really made an
we're
impression on me.
definite. You get to choose what we do with our time, right? And how
Hmm.
we, whether it's our money or whatever. And this is obviously a big investment. I mean, I run a 24/7 mission field
Hmm.
all the
Hmm.
time, and they never go home, or when they do, they're still at my house. And so that's a huge investment. But
Right,
we know adoption is at the heartbeat of is at the center of God's heartbeat. So it's
right,
not
right,
the question for all of us is not whether adoption is in the center of God's will. It's what are we called to do? Some of us are called to adopt. Some of us are called to pay and help
Mhm.
people adopt. Some of us are called to pray for that. But it is God's thing to take care. James talks about taking care of orphans and widows. It is in the center of what he wants us to do. So it's just a matter of figuring it out. And mine was bring them home. That's what was I supposed to do.
Okay, so the nest is empty now. You
No, not quite. I hadn't managed to figure out. I'm working on that. My oldest is 33 and my youngest will be 20 next month.
okay.
He's still here in the house, so he's
Okay.
working it out.
Okay, so the title of your book, the subtitle, Living a Focused, Faithful, and Fearless Life. Let's talk about each of those words and how they show up in your life. Focused, faithful, and fearless.
Sure. Those are, if you ask people to give you words that describe me, those are the words.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So that's where those come from. So obviously, as we've been talking, you can tell that I'm very focused at pursuing different things and working our way through stuff. So that focus concept is what kind of attention do I need to be able to give to something and not let things pull me away from it, but to make sure that I continue following either what God's called me to do or just even whatever objective I'm trying to reach, right? Is to not get distracted from that. And faithful, not only is that kind of the Christ follower aspect, but faithful means that I stay, I show up, and I am committed to you. So when we think about the kids, one thing about adoption is the first thing they're looking for is for you to push them back or give them back to
Right.
the system, or because everybody in their life has abandoned them. And, if I tell couples that are interested in adoption, I'm like, look, if I can talk you out of it, I'm talking you out of it right now because no way should you go into this and think that there's any way out,
Right.
any way out. So before you ever meet the kids, you need to be committed for life no matter what happens. And you need to be faithful to that. And like my husband said, divorce should never be a word that we ever use, right? And that we are committed and we are faithful to follow through on what God has given us to do. And then fearless is really just more being willing. And I really think it's just your faith muscle being strong, is being willing to do the things that God calls you to do. When he tells you to talk to someone, to get up and to go talk to them. When he tells you to start a ministry, my obedience was slow at first, but being willing to do that and getting better at that as we go. And what we found is because I've learned some things when I was younger, my faith muscle is pretty strong. So now the reason it seems like I'm fearless, and I'm pretty fearless, but is that when God says do something, I just go, okay, because I
Right.
figured out disobedience doesn't work. And I figured out, going slow is not the best thing. And so I go, okay, you want me to do that? Okay, we'll do that.
We'll do
Um,
that.
yeah. And so the back half of that book is really around what are practical ways that you can be focused and faithful and fearless and apply those to your life, because I think we can all take little nuggets of that to use in different ways.
And the focused, faithful, and fearless, sometimes it's messy. It's not always going to be pretty and feel good and have a nice bow on it. You
That's
can
for
be
sure.
focused, faithful, and fearless and be confused
Sure. Mhm.
and be in pain and be unsure.
Or like me, you can want to go climb in the bed, pull the covers over your head, and go, "What am I doing?" Or one day, my husband was laying in the bed, and we're both laying there, and we're both thinking, "God, if you are not real, we are crazy with all these kids in the house." And I'm like, "What have we done?" So the reality is it is going to be messy. That's what we need to
Yes.
be prepared for. Because here's the deal: if I am being obedient and I'm following what Christ tells me to do you think in this world Satan is going to be very excited about that?
Not at
Or
all.
or is he going to figure out what can I do to take
To
them
stop
out?
them.
right?
Exactly.
And you know where that happens in my house when I'm being fearless, taking on the world, expanding ministry and everything like that, my kids fall apart. Or,
Mm,
there's something at the school, or my husband and I start arguing, or, something. And it's because if he can break our family apart, then that
that's
can
what he wants.
ultimately derail me, right? And so that's what we have to realize is that we are in a battle. It is a war, and we just don't bring the mindset, the game to do that. So that's why focused and faithful is so important to being able to be fearless.
Excellent, excellent. And the title, of course, is The Heart of Legacy. And legacy shows up a lot in your talking. I've been on your website. What does legacy mean to you? And
Mhm.
has that definition changed over the years through the different things you've gone through?
Well, I would tell you that, and we're going to talk about Anchor Point in just a little bit, but when God was challenging me to start Anchor Point, I sat down with one of my friends and I thought, I'll just talk to her about it. She'll think it's a dumb idea and I'll be able to let this go. And when I was talking about it, I said, hey, what do you think about this? I said, what if we built this ministry? God's kind of given me this idea and we do something, we build something that outlives us and can continue to make an impact for years after we're gone. I said, what would you think about that? And she was like, all excited. And I'm like, oh, Lord, we're going to have to do this. But, what is it that, all of us are living our legacy right now. And, we can let life pass us by or we can be super intentional about it. Okay. But when we get to the end and we die, what is it that we leave behind to impact
Right.
people?
Hmm.
And for me, um, where that really took shape, okay, was when I held my boys when they died, is
Mm.
that the world became two different things and it became all about eternity. It wasn't that I wasn't a Christian before or whatever, but that experience was like, this is for real. I don't want people to miss, and then at that point on it was just like my whole being just was like, I want to be about eternity things. And eternity things are what really matter. And it's all that matters, right? I can
Mhm.
build a business. I can make sure at Exxon that you had gas at the gas station, all good stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can build legacies in wherever God's called you to be. But the reason I like the heart of legacy is because we have to build those now. And if I don't build it now, my life will pass me by and I'll miss the opportunity. And I don't want us to miss the opportunity. God has put us here. We are each unique. We each have things that He wants to do with us in the kingdom. And we just have to be brave enough to
To
trust
do.
Him. Yeah. And so
Mhm.
that's where that heart kind of came out is isn't the story of the boys. And it's just continued. And I feel stronger about that today. It's interesting. God had me kind of write this 7 years ago. And I just vomited it on paper and put it away. And I was like, okay, I've been obedient. I did what you asked. And then about a year ago, he was like, I need you to get that out and we need to like do the book now. And I'm like, for real? I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And I
Okay.
think it's best because we need purpose. That is what we were created for. And
Right.
that, if I'm in any conversation with anyone, I'm just like, how is God growing you? What is He doing in you? Because we just have too much to not use it wisely. And it's a privilege for us to be able to do that. Um, even if it's painful, even if it's messy, it's still a privilege, And
Yes.
so that's why the heart of legacy exists.
I want to back up to your company in 1 minute, but I want to say something about something you said. You said a few minutes ago, you said something like, um, we just have to, talking about purpose,
Mhm.
we just have to be brave enough. And in my
Mhm.
mind, I started finishing your sentence. I said to do it. But what you said was to trust him. Because and I'm really thinking that that fear comes in when we think that we're doing it.
Oh, yeah.
You can
That's for
remove
sure.
some of that fear if you're really just focusing on trusting him. Trust him to do it through you, as opposed to you trying to go out here and reinvent the wheel and start it from scratch. You're not starting from scratch.
Right. We
You're
never
building on what he's already put inside of you.
Yes, and here's the deal for us is that we will always face fear, okay? But the question is, what will we fear? Will we fear God more than we
Mm,
fear man? So it's not a matter of whether you're going to have fear. You are going to have fear, but I want my fear to be fear of God and letting him down and not living out and being the person that he calls and desires for me to be. That needs to be so much stronger. This awe of God and this holy creator, everything that I should just want to give my life for, right? And
right.
I want that to be so much stronger than any manly fear I would face. So, this concept of that I or you or whoever, whatever we're facing, we perform for an audience of one. Okay. And that's him. And here's the deal. If he tells me to write this book and I write this book or I build this business or I do whatever I'm supposed to do, and I completely in earthly realm look like an utter and complete failure, but I have done exactly what he wanted me to do, I have been successful.
He's pleased.
And
Right.
that's what we've got to change. It's because we look at what man sees and we think that is, what about the missionaries that go and spend their life on the mission field? No one gets saved, but they spend 10, 15, 20 years there, right? They have been faithful. They will be told that they're good and faithful servants. And they fear God more than they fear man. And we just get it wrong because we look at it from an earthly perspective. And that is what God is asking us to change and to get that perspective right. And so that always helps me when I know I'm facing fear. And then I go, okay, God, well, I've got fear of all these things, right? And I'm inadequate, but I know you're not, right? And
Right.
so I'm not starting on empty, like you said. I am
Mm,
starting with everything that I need. And I started praying. I had a conversation with someone today and we were talking, and I was like, I need to start praying like it's already happened because God says he will bring it down to earth. And I need to
right.
pray like I was thinking about, like, even for a wayward child, sometimes I pray that that child will hit bottom and finally be willing to turn around. That's the way I was praying. And what I
Mhm.
really should be praying is, thank you, God, that that child has turned around, that they are serving you, and that we are loving life. That's the way I should be praying because that is
Exactly.
calling heaven into it, right? And so God's working on me in that too, to say, hey, what do I need to take into the next level in my prayer life? So,
Exactly. Pray what God sees, not what we
yes,
see. In the heaven of heavenlies, your child is an evangelist, or you know what I'm saying? They're
right.
bigger than what we see. So pray that down as opposed to trying to get God to see this and change it.
Yeah.
Pray that
And
down.
yeah, and
Absolutely.
so I was praying a good prayer, even if I'm praying for them to hit rock bottom and to turn around, my sincerity was there. But you know what? I, in some ways, was limiting what could actually be done. And so
Wow.
I need to have this bigger, vision to kind of reach up there and bring it down. And the power of the words and the tongue is what transitions from the heavenlies down to here. And that's what we
That's
need
it.
to. Mhm.
Let's talk about anchor point. So, 7 years to the day after your sons died, you have your first set of children that you adopt. When did you start Anchor Point?
So Anchor
And
Point
tell
was
us what Anchor Point is.
Sure. Anchor Point was started in 2010. And that was just before I got the second set of children.
Okay.
So we have 5 children, and God's telling me to start a ministry. I'm like, dude, I'm busy. I'm busy. You can find some other girl. And at that point, you need to also realize that at that point in my life, I was working for Chuck Colson in Prison Fellowship, and I ran 4 states of prison ministry. And so I was very busy in ministry. I was very busy with my mission field at home. And God is saying, I want you and need you to do this. And I'm like, heck no. I said, that requires too much sacrifice, too much time, too much energy. No, you've got the wrong girl. Look at all these things I'm already doing, And he's like,
And
no,
what's God gonna say?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I know. And yeah, and God's like, no, I want you to do this. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm not doing this. This went on for about 2 years. Okay. About 2 years I held out because I was just like, no, I'm not going to do it. It's going to be too hard. Nope, 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 nope. Go get someone else. And he would never let it go. And what happened was he took my job away at Prison Fellowship in a course of about a week. And
Hmm.
I loved my job. And it was extremely painful, the process that I went through. And I remembered after all the dust settled, there was two things we wanted to happen in that. One, it was a surprise when it kind of happened, and this kind of all went down. One, I wanted to end well, but I also wanted my kids to know how to walk through difficult situations that take you by surprise. And so we had a what's next party for me. Because if God's obviously closing that door, there must be something bigger, right? And so we had this what's next party. We had cake, we had ice cream. I got presents, such a time as this, a new
Wow, that's
briefcase,
a good idea.
biographies to read, of great Christian leaders and all they've done and everything. And then after all the dust settles, God is talking to me and he's like, okay, do you have time now? And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do what you asked me to do. And then my friend agreed, right? She affirmed it. And then we started talking to people about it. So Anchor Point really is about helping families thrive. Okay. And we do that through a great family network that we have. We have a Obria Medical Clinic, and there we focus where young girls are struggling with whether to choose life for the child that they carry. And so we have medical teams that work with them, provide them information that they need to think through their choices. We cannot make their choice for them. So we will, we definitely don't want them to have an abortion because we just believe that is not the best thing for them, but we can't make the choice, but we can talk about all these things. And when we talk and just make the girls feel loved and comfortable, 85% of them will choose life because we're just wired to do it and they want to do it. And so we start there. And when the young lady has decided to choose life, we move over to our Hope Family Center. And there is where we do life on life or kind of case management. And we begin to work with the girls on a weekly basis and baby daddies to say, okay, what's going on, what's working, what's not working, are you in an abusive situation? What about your education? What about material assistance? What about this? And just start helping her kind of like my mom did with me. I need you to breathe and let's do one step at a time and everything. So because it's overwhelming, right? These girls, a lot of them weren't planning this and they don't know how to figure their way. And they already may be a kid from a hard place, just in an adult body. And now they've got this complication of the pregnancy and they're trying to figure their way. And they just need safe, loving people to breathe with them and put their arm around them and go, hey, we're gonna help you on this journey. We're not gonna do it all for you, but we're gonna help you. And that is just a great relief for them. So we work with them there. And then we have a maternity home that's called Hope House that is for any lady that is homeless and pregnant. And it's an 18-month program that looks at like everything 24/7. And what do we need to do to get you financially set with a tech kind of certificate degree so that you can take care of you and take care of the baby and be on your way, in 18, 20 months, however long it takes, but to come alongside them for that. And then last but not least, we have our community initiatives, Hope Community. And this is where we do our prenatal classes, our parenting classes, and these are open to the community at large. We begin to work with families that have adopted children that
Mm.
come hard places. So we do therapeutic camps to help the parents understand to connect with this child. And we have biological kids that come to this, biological families that come, because sometimes you just have children that you just don't know what to do with, right? They're just different than you. But
Right.
also that some of the most traumatic time for a kid is in the womb. And if a mother has a lot of stress going on in her life, positive or negative. So she could have a new job, she could move to a new house, she'd be going to Disney World, she'd be doing all these things, and she has a whole lot of stress. Stress passes through the umbilical cord and codes as cortisol on the kid, and this
Yes, it
kid's
does.
yeah, the kid's trajectory can be off when they're born. You know,
Right.
we've got to get this kid back on a good path. And so a lot of biological families, or they spent time in the NICU, don't realize that it's really a trauma thing and the kids need help and the parents don't quite know how to give it. So this camp comes alongside these families and helps them really be able to work with the kid and know how
Mhm.
to help that kid through. And then we do recovery group ministries through our Hope community, and that is for sexual abuse, abortion recovery, and just general trauma. So we have people that lose people or they've gone through difficult situations and they just need to process all that trauma. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're lifting the tide of parenting um, to make an impact so they can make legacy impacts and change their trajectories now and for eternity for both them and then break cycles for these kids. And so we try and be about the whole journey to get these kids to adulthood and not have them come back in the other side of my ministry.
While you were talking, the phrase restorer of the breach popped in my head. Um, yeah,
Mhm,
because a lot of times there are things that they've learned that they have
mhm.
to unlearn and to break that cycle in their families going forward.
Yeah, and most of the people that come into Anchor Point, they have pretty amazing trauma backgrounds themselves, right? And so they maybe haven't dealt with those things. And even my healthy parents that come to camp, they have a lot of stuff they don't realize they have because they're getting triggered by their kid and it's all their stuff getting triggered. And so there's a lot to learn there. And one thing having 9 children will teach you, especially with trauma backgrounds, is
Right.
I get triggered all the time, right? And so there's a lot of work that God wanted and is doing in me so that I can be the mom and be fully present for the children that He has given me. And
Wow.
I find more of the work is in me than my children. Uh,
Yes.
but
I think
that's a big overview of Anchor Point, and literally we get to impact thousands of lives a year. And we're very blessed and privileged to be able to be in those spaces with those families.
so. This is your 15th year now
Yeah. Uh-huh.
after
Yeah.
telling God that you were too busy and you couldn't
Yes.
do it.
And I adopted twice more.
You
But
have?
no, I mean, I after I
Oh,
started Anchor,
after that.
I
That's right.
adopted
Yes, yes,
the second
yes.
and the
Okay.
third ones, right? I'm like, oh
Yes.
God.
Oh, are you working on anything now?
Sure. Our biggest things now, when we think about, always at Anchor Point, we're looking at expanding and how we can influence even more families and build, larger teams and break into different areas that we're not into. So we're definitely always about that because I think there's always a great need. For me personally, another thing that we're doing is part of the reason the book is coming out is because we talked about, I shouldn't be bringing more people back into my house, but how could I influence other people? And so, how can we move me into this thought leader and begin to expand my influence? I've taught across the country before and stuff like that, but it's been kind of sporadic. So, what we're doing is beginning to expand the writing that I do, the teaching that I do, kind of the coaching that I do, to create awareness for Anchor Point, but also to be able to impact others and challenge them to be the people that God's called them to be. So,
To do the same thing that you're doing,
yeah, or some version of it. You don't have to do
some
exactly
version of it.
what Debbie
Yeah,
does,
yeah, yeah.
but whatever
Right, right.
God's got for you is we want you walking out your legacy, right? So
Okay. Excellent. Okay, where can our viewers find you online?
sure. If you want to learn more about Anchor Point, It's anchorpoint.us. And you can see all the great stuff that we do. Also, in the very back of the book is just story after story of impact of Anchor Point too. So you can learn more there. And then for me in particular, it's thedebbie.simmons.com. And when you go there, you can see on the book, my speaking and the coaching and things that I do. And, my heartbeat is we're all on a journey. And, somebody reached back and grabbed me and pulled me along. And, my job is to reach back and figure out how I can pull other people along and just catapult them out there to success. So that's what thedebbie.simmons.com is all about. And it has all the social media handles for both organizations on the websites and stuff like that. And we'd love for, people to like, follow, share, whatever my social media people tell me I'm supposed to do. So we want that. We want people to engage with us, and we want to, plant positive seeds and help people as God sees fit for that.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're at the point of the interview where I ask our guests the same five questions. We're the Healing Words podcast. So we're using the first letter from the word words, and we're relating this to the book, your book.
Yeah.
W, when? When did you know for certain that you would write this book?
Well, I told you a little earlier that 7 years ago God told me to do it. And that's when I did, that's when I did the first pass. I really did not think, I really thought I was done with it. But
Hmm.
it has been in the last 18 months that God said, no, now I'm going to use it and get it out and let's do it. And it wasn't titled this or anything way back then. It was just my story, my gift to God. And this is what it's turned into. So really, it's been about 18 months that he kind of pulled all that stuff back up.
Okay. Did you face any obstacles in the writing of this book?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I hate grammar if you knew me. So grammar's involved in writing. And so I have to have strong people come alongside me. If I can just dump thoughts on paper and someone will do grammar for me, it is a blessing for me. But I will tell you, as you do something like this, there's kind of two kind of things that happened is all kind of issues came up with trying to get it done. I mean, just like this didn't work, or the publisher didn't do this, or it was supposed to come out. It was supposed to be done last October. I mean, it's been done for a while. And things just kept getting in the way. And even in January, balls were being dropped. And I'm like, God, we got to get this done, and it was just like thing after thing after thing tried to attack, making sure that this story didn't get out there. And then the second piece that was a real challenge for me is I have an identity issue. My fear of God's kind of low at that point because I'm obviously thinking about me, but like, is this a story even worth sharing? Will anybody even like it? I mean, this is my raw heart. I'm going to put out here on a platter and people are going to, and so I'm like, God, this is like risky, and so having to do that work on me for what was getting all excited in there is that I just wasn't trusting him with this, and that it was, my, selfish look at man, look at me, and then who am I to tell the story, and
Right.
but God has a bigger picture. So you kind of fight on both sides. And the reality is the more I feel imposter syndrome is what I think is a great way to call it. Actually, that is when we should know that God's probably taken us to the next level and that we are not the thing, he's the thing, right? And so trying to learn to deal with that. So I'm doing better with that. But it's all good. He's been very gracious and gentle with me as I've gone through this.
Okay, so maybe I should whisper this, but do you think you'll be writing another book at
Hey,
some point?
that's a great question because May 8th, I am a author in a parenting book. There's like 50 of us that collaborated together. It's the Perfectly Imperfect Family. And I write a chapter in there. So that's coming. And someone said something to me the other day about, oh, you'll write multiple books. I'm like, So maybe so. We'll see what God has in store. But there is another one coming on May 8th. So I'm super excited about that too.
Okay, so for the R, rear view, knowing what you know now,
Mhm,
today, right now, what would you tell yourself back 30 years ago when you were at the lowest of the low?
mhm.
What advice
Lowest of
did you give yourself?
lowest of the low. I would probably say the thing that I say now more than anything, like when staff are having issues or whatever, my first comment is always no worries. No worries. God's got this. He's not surprised by where we sit. He's not surprised by what's happening. This didn't come as a shocker. I know it's a shocker to me, but it's not a shocker to him. And he is going to show us how to get through it. And my staff will always go, how are we going to get through it? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't know. But I do know we're going to take the next best step and we're going to
Right.
figure it out as we go. And God is faithful. So if I could have learned earlier to go there first, then a lot of things probably would have been easier in my life. However, God has allowed me to have all those things be teachers, right? And so I'm much better at that now. But the no worries, God's got it is the thing that I think is the biggest thing.
That reminds me of a funny meme I saw on social media not too long ago. It says, I trust God, but I'm going to panic first.
Yeah, of
So,
course. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a good one.
okay, so the S, strengthen. How have you been strengthened by the writing of this book?
Well, we talked a little bit already about how God really worked on the imposter syndrome and the process of anything inside of me that he needs to kind of clean up so we can take it to the next level, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing I think is really encouraging and strengthening to me is that the people who read the book and what they say
Yeah.
and how they're impacted by it. I had one person that today wrote me an email and he said, I had no idea. He's known me for years. He said, I had no idea that this was all in your story. I had no
Wow.
idea that you walked through all this. And I am just so grateful for how you walk through that, how you've used that, how you let God use that. And he goes, I'm so inspired. And he goes, this made my week. And I'm like, oh,
Wow.
that's great. But I was like, oh, that's great. God's using it, and
Yes,
so
yes.
I think that is an affirmation that my little heart needs to continue to fear God and trust him in this process of doing this and putting this out there and talking and doing these things.
I'm wondering if while you were writing, let me preface it with this. Sometimes we forget things. We forget the things that God has done in our lives. Sometimes we just so focused on that. We see the big and sometimes forget the little. I'm wondering if while you were writing and culling all this information, putting your book, if every now and again you say, oh, gosh, I can't believe I forgot that. Or I
Mm,
can't, you know,
yeah.
and did that strengthen your faith even more?
Well, I think that I have kind of a different because I was told to do it 6 years ago. I
Mm,
wrote so much stuff down there that
mm,
I maybe didn't run into that as much, from that perspective, because I had documented tons and tons of things when I just did that first dump. And so, but I would say, I think it doesn't matter. Like when I was redoing it and having to relay it out differently and stuff like that, I think that God uses that to show me that here's where I showed up, here's where I showed up, here's the things I've taught you. And I'm like,
right,
oh, yeah, you have, and like this whole concept of from why to how to survive to how to thrive. I mean, he gave me that years ago, right?
right.
And I'm going, people, whenever I'm on podcast or whatever, people love that. And I'm like going, well, I've been doing that for years, right? And God's like, no, I gave that to you. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. You gave it to me. But I'm going, that just comes easy to me now. But I'm going, that's something he reminded me that he's taught me, or this no worries, trust God type thing, and things like that. And so it's been real interesting as I've done some of the podcasts, the things that come out of my mouth, I'm going that resonate with people. I'm going, oh, that's really cool. So I think that's one way he strengthened me and kind of reminded me that he is there. And I think the more we can get really good at putting stakes in the ground and
Yes.
journaling or whatever, or like I like to keep, a lot of people do a word for the year,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
it gives them a word. Well, I don't know what you do with your words, but I actually, another couple and my husband and I engrave a rock with the word and the year. And so I
Mm.
have rocks that have my year, and this year's word is thrive. And so that's, on that rock, and I know right where they sit, and it's a reminder of how faithful he's been to
Wow.
me, lessons that I learned in that year that we went through. So
Excellent. Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for dropping by and chatting with us. This has been wonderful. Lots of nuggets here. And I'm
good.
sure our viewers will go and check you out on your social media and to purchase your book. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you for writing your book. It's been so informative. Appreciated
Yeah.
it so much. So we'll see everyone here on the next edition and say goodbye to Debbie, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye bye.